A British passion for order and efficiency was the motive behind an early initiative to put every race in a separate place, and the racial enclaves that were created remained a fact of life during the colonial era. But where's the man who's going to tell us all about it? Surely that's not him in the kitchen.
Yes, I am Julian Davison, and no, Sight and Sound hasn't become a cooking program. I'm cooking this little meal, partly because I'm getting a little peckish, and also to show Singapore's harmonious racial mix. I've started with some tasty British stock, not too strong but a good start. And over here are some vegetables from my Chinese greengrocer around the corner, some kampong chicken from my Malay friend at the wet market, and some fiery Indian curry powder. And what do we got? Delicious. A promising combination of British, Malay, Chinese and Indian ingredients, which, like Singapore itself, has to mix and simmer a while to achieve perfection. And whilst it does so, I'm off to see my friend Julie Yeo at Antiques of the Orient to do a little bit of research.
Unlike Julian's curry, the British in the early 19th century had no intention of blending Singapore's multiracial ingredients together. For every race a separate place was the objective, and they allocated districts to the various racial groups where they might best serve the interests of Singapore's commercial development. And it was developing surprisingly fast, considering that not too long before, colonial mapmakers weren't even sure what shape it was.
Now, because they were coming and surveying in a sailing boat, they thought that it was two different islands,
Really?
3 different islands,
Yeah.
and they drew it as such.
Yeah.
The shape is, of course, all wrong. They thought that it was like a sandwich, 3 little islands together, piled one on top of the other.
Right, okay.
Yeah. And here's another one, Laurel and Whittle.
Right.
You see the focus of the Indonesian islands around
More
here.
important in those
the
days.
Riau Archipelago.
Yes.
And again, the 3 islands. They thought it was 3 little islands.
This map, drawn up in 1822 by Lieutenant Jackson under the close supervision of Stamford Raffles, located the British centrally. The Indians were placed close on the other side of the river, which was where most of them found work, and the Chinese were allocated a large enclave directly alongside and adjoining the business district. The Malay community were obliged to move out of town, to the east and west along the coast. Eurasians, Arabs, Jews, Armenians and many others began to arrive, adding their contributions to the settlement's growth and prosperity, forming a gathering of small enclaves of their own. As might be expected, the British took up the prime position, setting up business just across the Singapore River and setting up house nearby.
Just passing through. Do forgive me.
This unfortunately pushed the then current residents, the Malays, east to Kampong Glam and west to Telok Blangah. Stamford Raffles fully expected a great many Chinese immigrants and prudently planned a generous space for Singapore's Chinatown. And the Indians? They took up residence next door to them, around the Chulia Street area.
Which reminds me, my curry should be just about done. The first Indians who came to Singapore arrived along with Stamford Raffles. They were soldiers in the East India Company Army. He asked them to stay, and being loyal sort of fellows, they did. Many of them chose not to go home. Instead, they happily married local Malay ladies, gently stirring Singapore's multiracial melting pot.
The next major influx of Indians to Singapore was the result of a colonial trade of territories. The Dutch colonial empire agreed to swap their Malayan possession of Malacca for the British possession of Bencoolen in Sumatra. It was a win-win situation.
So, the Dutch got the Brits out of Sumatra, and the Brits got the Dutch off the Malay Peninsula.
But Bencoolen was also an Indian penal colony. So where were all these convicts now sent? You guessed it, Singapore.
But before my Indian friends start throwing bricks through my window, I should hasten to add that along with the Indian convicts came a whole lot of clever businessmen and entrepreneurs from all over India, as well as Penang and Malacca. and together they made a substantial contribution to the success of early Singapore. I'm not for 1 minute suggesting that today's Indian community are all descended from convicts.
But there were nevertheless initially a great many of them, clearing jungles, making roads, draining swamps, and even building their own prison here at Dhoby Ghaut.
I'm standing on Mount Sophia, roughly behind where the old cafe building used to be, looking down Bras Basah. And over there is the Indian convict prison. And like the Indian soldiers who came with Raffles, many of them, upon their release, decided to stay on. And doing the laundry, the dhoby, was a viable living. You can see where they hung their washing out to dry, roughly on the site of today's Dhoby Ghaut MRT station. The convicts built just about everything in those days. Indeed, it has been said that the history of the Public Works Department in the 19th century was actually the history of the Singapore prisons. Later, the Presbyterians came to build their church on the site, much more wholesome. And this, incidentally, is where my grandparents were married, and my father was christened back in 1920. And here it is again today. A lot noisier than it was back then.
Despite Stamford Raffles' best intentions, the Indian community slowly moved from around Chulia Street through Dhoby Ghaut and finally settled astride the first couple of kilometres of Serangoon Road.
And it's not all that different from when I used to walk along here 20 to 30 years ago.
Back then, this is what it looked like. The spiritual heart of the Indian community of Singapore. The whole of India crammed into just a couple of square kilometres.
See that high-rise on the left, what is now the New Park Hotel? Well, let's whip across there and take a look at the view today. The cars and buses may be a little more modern, but I'm happy to say that here in Little India, one still gets a very real sense of an historical continuity with the past.
One can only cross one's fingers and hope it survives. In 1819, Stamford Raffles stepped onto the Singapore stage with persuasive charm and due deference to the Tumengong, the local Malay ruler. But he was faced with a bit of a diplomatic problem.
The Tumengong in Singapore and the regional ruler Sultan Hussein both felt themselves to be in charge, so Raffles undertook the time-honoured British diplomatic ploy of divide and conquer. Exploiting the rivalry between them, they were both handsomely paid off, an agreement was signed, and Raffles moved in.
The terms of the original agreement only extended inland as far as one could fire a cannonball. But give some people an inch and they'll grab a mile. 6 years later, the treaty was renegotiated, this time for the whole island, forever. The Tumengong and his followers headed west to Teluk Blangah, while Sultan Hussein made himself at home at Kampong Glam.
And here on Java Road is the Fatima Haji Mosque, which was on the edge of their area of settlement.
The mosque is still here, but Java Road has moved elsewhere, and in its place is a quiet park right alongside the top of Beach Road.
And the splendid Sultan Mosque is still with us, and I imagine it always will be, right beside where Sultan Hussein and his descendants made their home.
You see that building on the right there, covered with the blue tarpaulin? Well, that's Sultan Hussein's palace, the Kampong Glam Istana, and it's currently undergoing a major renovation. Good morning, gentlemen.
Hi, Julian.
Peter, very
Welcome.
good of you to meet me here.
Oh,
So
pleasure.
this is a place I've had my eye on for a
Wow.
long time, and yeah, I'd like to go inside. I've never been inside. It's actually quite spacious, much larger than it seems when you just see the front elevation.
It is, isn't it?
Right.
When we have the Malay Heritage Center open next year, the old Istana building will house the museum, which will capture the golden era, so to say, of the Malay Sultanate, not only in Singapore, but in the whole Johor Riau region.
Right.
And at the same time, we will try to capture various aspects of Malay life, Malay aspirations, Malay problems, if you like, throughout the ages, pre-independence, post-independence, and aspirations for the future. And all will be housed in this lovely
in
istana.
this istana.
Of course, after restoration.
Yeah, after, of course. And I mean, standing here and looking right down, of course, you see this beautiful symmetry of Palladian architecture.
Yeah.
It's really a perfect demonstration of that.
Yeah.
It was very dilapidated and the condition of the building was really bad. You can see these timber members, although we tried to save a lot of the major beams, quite a lot of it had suffered from termites. So
It
that
was in a
applied.
bad shape, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was in a very bad shape. And this space was not as open and spacious as you find it today. It was, in fact, thoroughly partitioned out, and we had to remove all the partitions.
I see. Right. And I can see through the arches over there, there's another structure which has obviously been recently restored. Perhaps you can tell us a bit about that
You're
one.
talking about the Gedung Kuning.
Yeah, oh, well, that's a good name for it. The yellow building.
Well,
yeah.
it's yellow mansion.
Yeah.
And in fact, a lot of people wish as though it was like a kind of a Rumah Bendahara or the Prime Minister or the Minister's house.
Yes.
But in actual fact, it was actually owned by a Malay businessman, Yusuf Talipinggang, they call it.
Yeah.
We have now tendered out this place to a museum restaurant, and we are hoping to bring back to life the entertainment, the music, the culture of the yesteryears, so people can enjoy it again.
Right.
And this will be the place.
Which is the front of the building? I mean, I thought that was the front, and yet walking in here, this could be the vestibule as well. I mean,
This is what I'll call a very unique feature about this building because it's got a double frontage. There is a main entrance which takes from Sultan Gate, but surprisingly, there is also another entrance which bears out to Kandahar Street.
Right.
So this is a villa that has got almost a shop.
So I think he must really be having the best of both worlds. You know, you have a kind of a royal frontage, but you have the lay people and the business. Because a lot of this area actually were then occupied by traders, small traders, from spice merchants to cobblers to tailors. So I think it was very wise of him to have this kind of a dual.
Work from home.
Yes, that's right.
Very modern. Modern concept that.
Yeah.
Fascinated by these lovely these doors here. It seems a more spacious sort of residence of the Bandahara's house than the Sultan's. What do you make of that?
Well, it shows the power of business.
Certainly.
I'd like to think that what's happening at Kampong Glam Istana will make this one of the most fascinating places to visit in Singapore. And that local people whose families have lived and worked here for maybe 3 or 4 generations, will remain here. Rather as has happened in Little India, but which is sadly not the case in Chinatown, where commercial rents have obliged local people to move out in large numbers. I'm personally looking forward to the opening of Kampong Glam Istana early next year, and I shall be here on opening day. See you there. One of Raffles' founding principles was that Singapore should always be a free port. And right from the beginning, immigrants from China came here in large numbers. But let's just concentrate on a trio of early business pioneers for the moment. Our 3 musketeers of Chinese commerce. And one of them came from Malacca in 1819, hot on the heels of Sir Stamford himself. He started out as a fruit and vegetable seller, did well, opened a shop, and then became a successful business speculator. And though he ended up as one of the wealthiest merchants in the settlement, he never forgot his humble origins, nor the suffering of those less fortunate than he. You will recognize his name, Tan Tock Seng.
Just behind People's Park here, on Yutong Sen Street, he contributed substantial funds in 1844 to build a pauper's hospital, seen here in this early painting on the slopes of Pearl's Hill, and completed in 1849. At the base of Pearl's Hill, there was once upon a time a real People's Park that gave the location its name. But let's catch up with Julian again in his search for the site of the first Tan Tock Seng Hospital.
And up here on Pearl's Hill Road, I think we may have found what we are looking for.
This level ground is almost certainly the site of the first Tan Tock Seng Hospital, which probably stood exactly on the same spot as the former police headquarters stand today. But it doesn't look as if they're going to be around for much longer either.
Tan Tock Seng died in 1850, but his legacy and his name lived on. The second hospital to bear his name was on the Balestier Plain, and in 1909, the third Tan Tock Seng Hospital was established in Moulmein Road, where it still remains. Many of its original buildings are still there, and it's grown considerably in recent years, a fitting tribute to its namesake, Tan Tock Seng.
And while we're in the right area, let's not leave our friend Tan Tock Seng just yet. Follow me. I think I'm round the corner from Fish Street. It certainly smells like it. And here we are at Tan Tock Seng's Ellenborough building, a two-storey shophouse complex completed in 1847 and named after the then recently departed Governor-General of British India. And I've stepped into something rather nasty. Excuse me a minute.
Just behind the Ellenborough building stood the first Ellenborough market, constructed around the same time. And today, you'd never know the market had ever been there, would you?
The second of our three musketeers of early commerce is Tan Kim Seng, who arrived from Malacca in 1840 and soon founded a trading company at Boat Quay.
Like Tan Tock Seng, he used much of the wealth he accrued from tin, trade and nutmeg plantations to benefit those less fortunate. And this is the site of his go-down on the bank of South Boat Quay, where now lies a broad pedestrian path beside the Riverwalk complex. And 3 kilometres upriver, he financed the construction of a thoroughfare across the river. And yes, it's called Kim Seng Road. A kilometre away from the street that bears his name is where Kim Seng lived, just off River Valley Road in a magnificent mansion called Panglima Prang. And these photos taken prior to its demolition in 1982 give you an idea of its splendour and opulence.
So is his sterling reputation and a street sign all that Tan Kim Seng has left us? Not so. In recognition of his considerable donation to improving the town's water supply, it was appropriate that an elaborate Victorian-style water fountain be dedicated to his memory somewhere around about here in Fullerton Square.
This sprightly fountain spent its youth and adulthood in Battery Road, and here in Esplanade Park it will hopefully be permitted to enjoy a sedate old age. It contrasts bravely with Singapore's most recent icon, and I think we can guess which one Julian prefers. All 3 of Singapore's early captains of commerce had business ventures along the Singapore River. Tan Kim Seng's go-down site next to Riverwalk, further along past Coleman Bridge, the site of Tan Tock Seng's Ellenborough building. And if you look very carefully, you'll see a familiar figure who's about to tell us what our third pioneer was up to around here.
Indeed I am. And goodness, here I go, slipping into the past again. Anyway, you see that building in front of the old Hill Street police station? Well, believe it or not, but in 1854, that was the coolest place in town.
A bar, a disco, a club? Not much chance of that back then.
Singapore's first ice house stood just about here. Unfortunately, it became a traffic casualty when they widened River Valley Road. Its passing didn't go unmourned though, and it is still remembered today about 100 paces upstream from its original site. Ice was something of a novelty back in the mid-19th century.
And it wasn't simply a matter of opening the refrigerator, because refrigeration hadn't yet arrived.
It was imported by ship all the way from America, one of the many business ventures of Hua Kei, perhaps better remembered today as Whampoa.
Whampoa arrived in Singapore in 1830, and within a few decades of diligent hard work was reputed to have become the wealthiest merchant in the young colony. A dedicated philanthropist, he shared his financial good fortune. bestowing generous grants upon numerous charitable organizations. A fluent English speaker, he became a member of the rather exclusive Legislative Council.
Well done. Like Tan Tok Seng and Kim Seng, RK got his name onto a lot of street signs and such like. But what I'm really interested in here is the location of his magnificent mansion out along Serangoon Road. As far as I can establish, it should be just about here. Oh dear, rather disappointing.
Whampoa's first residence was demolished over 100 years ago, and he replaced it with the magnificent Bendemeer House. No photos exist of Whampoa's first house, only a number of early paintings that depict the lively entertainments that accompanied his sumptuous dinner parties, irrigated by an endless flow of French champagne. His hospitality was legendary, and so too was his Chinese garden.
Now we do have a photograph of this, and I must say that had I been around at the time, I'd have given absolutely anything for an invitation to dinner at Whampoa's house.
Julian clearly has a passion for good living, and on next week's show, Living Well and Living Hell, he'll taste the high life and the low life of early Singapore.
This is rather me, don't you think?
See fun at the top and work till you drop. Some things don't really change, do they?
I'm about 160 years too late for dinner with Whampoa, and this is just about as close as I'm likely to get to it. But who knows? I could be in his sitting room. Hello.
Hello.
Limon cha.
Okay.
Sit.
Thank you.
Sit. At Whampoa's table, it would have been iced French champagne. But today, I'm afraid I'll have to make do with iced lemon tea. Cheers. And lost my footing. Almost fell in the bloody river. And though he was one of the wealthiest, sorry, I'm getting my lines all, he became, sorry about that, you want to put your camera down?